The radio static cut through the afternoon air at Forward Operating Base Meridian like a death sentence. All units, this is command. Operation Sandstorm is compromised. All support personnel are to withdraw immediately. I repeat, withdraw immediately. Hallie Harris stood frozen at her sniper's perch, watching through her scope as 600 Marines found themselves abandoned in hostile territory, pinned down by enemy fire with no extraction plan. What happened next would either court-martial the 22-year-old European marksman or prove that sometimes the most dangerous thing you can do is follow orders. Before we continue, let us know where you're watching from. If you're enjoying this, don't miss out. Subscribe now for more. The morning briefing had ended 20 minutes ago, but Hallie Harris remained seated in the back row of the operations tent, her notebook filled with tactical notes that no one had asked for. At 22, she possessed the kind of quiet intensity that made people uncomfortable. Her pale green eyes seemed to catalog everything from wind patterns to sight lines, calculating angles and distances that weren't part of her assigned duties. Born in Prague to a Czech mother and British father, Hallie had arrived at FOB Meridian 6 months earlier with a service record that should have commanded respect. She held the highest marksmanship scores in her training battalion, could consistently hit targets at ranges that impressed even veteran snipers, and had completed advanced reconnaissance training that few soldiers attempted. Yet somehow, she found herself assigned to perimeter security detail, watching empty desert through binoculars while more important missions went to others. "Harris," called out Sergeant Major Blake Thompson, a barrel-chested Texan whose voice carried the authority of 20 years in the Marines. "You're on tower duty again today. Sector 3, 12-hour shift." Hallie nodded without comment, gathering her equipment with practiced efficiency. Tower duty meant another day of watching for threats that never materialized, another day of proving she could follow simple orders while her skills atrophied in the desert heat. As she walked toward her assigned position, she overheard a conversation that made her jaw tighten. Staff Sergeant Rodriguez was briefing his squad about today's reconnaissance patrol, a high-value mission into disputed territory where intelligence suggested enemy movement. "Thompson says we're not taking Harris," Rodriguez explained to his team. "Too small for the equipment load, and frankly, I don't need someone who thinks they're Annie Oakley trying to prove something when things get hot." The words stung because they carried the weight of 6 months of similar dismissals. Hallie had watched patrol after patrol head out without her, had seen soldiers with half her training selected for missions that matched her specialized skills. Her compact 5'4" frame, barely 125 pounds, seemed to override every qualification she'd earned. In the military's calculus, physical presence mattered more than precision, and Hallie had learned to accept her relegation to support roles. What her colleagues didn't know was how Hallie spent her off-duty hours. While others played cards or slept, she studied satellite imagery of the surrounding terrain, memorizing every ridge, every compound, every potential sniper nest within a 50-mile radius. She practiced with her rifle in conditions that would challenge experienced marksmen, shooting at targets in sandstorms, at dawn when visibility was compromised, in scenarios that pushed her skills beyond standard requirements. Her precision had become legendary among the few who'd witnessed it. During a training exercise 3 months ago, she'd consistently hit man-sized targets at 1,200 meters in crosswinds that had other snipers missing by yards. Captain Mitchell, the base's senior sniper instructor, had called her shooting supernatural. But somehow that praise never translated into operational assignments. The isolation had begun to wear on her. Hallie came from a family of soldiers. Her grandfather had served in the resistance during World War II, her father had been a paratrooper, and she'd grown up believing that competence would be recognized and rewarded. The reality of military bureaucracy, where connections and perceptions often mattered more than ability, had been a harsh education. From her tower position, Hallie could see the motor pool where the reconnaissance teams were preparing for departure. She watched through her scope as they loaded equipment, checked weapons, and conducted final briefings for missions she should have been part of. The familiar ache of unused potential settled in her chest, the feeling of being a thoroughbred forced to pull a plow. Her radio crackled with routine traffic, weather updates, patrol check-ins, the mundane communications that kept the base functioning. Hallie monitored the frequencies out of habit, her tactical mind automatically processing information and identifying patterns that others missed. She'd noticed irregularities in enemy radio traffic over the past week, subtle changes in patrol schedules and movement patterns that suggested something significant was being planned. She'd written detailed reports about her observations, including recommendations for increased reconnaissance in specific sectors. The reports had been filed and forgotten, dismissed as the overenthusiasm of someone trying to justify a role beyond their assignment. But as Hallie scanned the horizon through her scope, she couldn't shake the feeling that the enemy was preparing something large, something that would test every defensive capability the base possessed. The sun climbed higher, and the desert heat began its daily assault on everything metal and human. Hallie adjusted her position in the tower, settled her rifle more comfortably, and began another day of watching for threats while her real talents remained locked away like ammunition in a vault. She had no way of knowing that before the day ended, those talents would be the difference between catastrophe and survival for 600 Marines who were about to learn what it meant to be abandoned by the very command structure they'd trusted with their lives.
The first signs of trouble came during the afternoon briefing when Captain Elena Vasquez announced the day's patrol assignments. Hallie had requested permission to attend, citing her observations about enemy movement patterns, but found herself sitting in the back while decisions were made about operations she'd studied extensively. Intelligence suggests increased activity in grid squares 4-7 through 4-9, Captain Vasquez announced, pointing to areas on the digital map that Hallie had flagged in her reports weeks earlier. We're sending 3 reconnaissance teams to investigate and establish overwatch positions. As the captain began assigning personnel, Hallie felt the familiar knot form in her stomach. Team Alpha, Staff Sergeant Rodriguez, Corporal Martinez, Private First Class Johnson, and Specialist Wright. Team Bravo, Sergeant Collins, Lance Corporal Thompson, Private Davis, and Private Kim. Team Charlie, Staff Sergeant Murphy, Corporal Anderson, Private Lewis, and Specialist Brown. The names continued, each one representing someone chosen over her despite her superior qualifications for reconnaissance work. Harris came the inevitable assignment. You'll maintain overwatch from Tower 3. Report any movement in sectors 1 through 6. Another day of watching empty desert while the real work happened elsewhere. Hallie nodded professionally, but inside she was calculating how many opportunities she'd been denied, how many times her expertise had been overlooked in favor of soldiers whose primary qualification was fitting the expected profile of a combat operative. After the briefing, she approached Captain Vasquez directly, something she'd avoided in the past to maintain military courtesy. "Ma'am, I've been tracking movement patterns in the areas you've assigned for reconnaissance. I believe I could provide valuable insight if included in the patrol operations." Vasquez looked up from her paperwork with the expression of someone interrupted by a minor administrative issue. "Harris, your job is perimeter security. The reconnaissance teams have extensive experience in hostile territory. What they need is someone reliable maintaining overwatch, not another rifle to manage." "With respect, ma'am, my marksmanship scores and tactical training exceed most of the personnel you've assigned. I've also identified specific threat indicators that suggest—" "Harris," Vasquez interrupted, her voice carrying warning. "Are you questioning my assignment decisions?" The conversation had shifted from tactical discussion to disciplinary territory, and Hallie recognized the danger. "No, ma'am, just offering additional resources if needed." "The resources I need are soldiers who focus on their assigned duties rather than trying to expand their roles without authorization. Tower duty is critical work. I suggest you approach it with the attention it deserves." Walking away from that conversation, Hallie felt the weight of institutional bias that had followed her throughout her military career. Her compact frame, her quiet demeanor, her methodical approach to problems, all traits that made her exceptional at precision shooting, were somehow interpreted as limitations in the broader military context. The pattern had established itself within weeks of her arrival. During her first month, she'd volunteered for advanced training exercises and been told that the physical demands might be too challenging. When she'd completed those exercises at the top of her class, the response had been surprise rather than recognition. When she'd requested assignment to sniper operations, she'd been told that the role required someone with more command presence. The irony wasn't lost on her that command presence seemed to be defined by physical intimidation rather than tactical competence. Hallie had grown up learning that precision was more valuable than power, that intelligence could overcome brute force, but the military hierarchy seemed to operate on different principles. She'd watched soldiers with inferior training receive opportunities that matched her qualifications. Private Johnson, who couldn't hit targets consistently beyond 400 meters, had been assigned to overwatch positions that required 800-meter precision. Corporal Martinez, whose tactical evaluation scored 20 points below hers, led reconnaissance missions into terrain she'd mapped and analyzed. The exclusion had become more systematic over time. Her detailed reports about enemy patterns were acknowledged but never acted upon. Her requests for additional training were approved but never scheduled. Her suggestions during tactical discussions were noted but never implemented. She'd become invisible in the way that competent people sometimes do when their competence challenges assumptions about what competence looks like. The isolation extended beyond professional dismissal into social alienation. Fellow soldiers treated her with polite distance, as if her dedication to her craft was somehow unseemly. She'd overheard conversations that revealed the underlying assumptions. She was trying too hard, was too intense, was overcompensating for obvious limitations. From her tower position that afternoon, watching the reconnaissance teams disappear into the desert heat, Hallie wondered if she was fighting a battle she couldn't win. The military had given her skills that few possessed, but seemed determined to prevent her from using them. She was a precision instrument being used as a paperweight, and the frustration was becoming harder to contain. What she couldn't know was that the enemy movement patterns she'd been tracking were about to converge into the largest coordinated attack the base had faced, and that her overlooked expertise would soon be the only thing standing between success and catastrophe. We've invested considerable effort in bringing you this story. If you find it engaging, please consider subscribing to our channel. Your support is greatly appreciated. Now, let's return to the narrative.
While the reconnaissance teams established positions in the disputed territories, Hallie maintained her vigil from Tower 3 with the methodical precision that had become her trademark. Her scope swept across assigned sectors in calculated patterns, but her mind processed intelligence far beyond her official duties. Through her high-powered optics, she tracked vehicle movements, personnel rotations, and communication patterns that painted a picture of coordinated enemy preparation. Her notebook, hidden beneath standard observation logs, contained detailed sketches of defensive positions, weapon emplacements, and supply routes that she'd mapped during weeks of unauthorized surveillance. Every evening, after her official duties ended, Hallie analyzed satellite imagery that she'd requested through unofficial channels, correlating weather patterns with enemy activity, identifying optimal firing positions that command had never considered. The dedication bordered on obsession, but stemmed from professional pride rather than personal ambition. Her grandfather's stories about resistance fighters had instilled in her a belief that preparation could mean the difference between success and catastrophe. In her family's military tradition, knowing your enemy was as important as knowing your weapon. From her tower position, she could observe the base's defensive weaknesses with uncomfortable clarity. The perimeter was designed for conventional attacks, not the coordinated assault that her intelligence gathering suggested was imminent. She'd identified 17 potential breach points, calculated optimal fields of fire for counter-sniper operations, and developed contingency plans for scenarios that official doctrine hadn't considered. Her marksmanship practice had evolved beyond regulation requirements into something approaching art.
During off-duty hours, she practiced in conditions that challenged every aspect of her skill set. Night shooting with minimal illumination, precision targeting in sandstorms, rapid target acquisition under stress, all scenarios that might seem excessive to someone who viewed her role as purely defensive. The custom modifications to her rifle represented months of careful adjustment and testing. She'd fine-tuned the trigger mechanism for optimal sensitivity, adjusted the stock for perfect alignment with her compact frame, and calibrated the scope for atmospheric conditions specific to their operational area. These modifications exceeded standard equipment specifications, but they allowed her to achieve precision that would have seemed impossible to someone using regulation weapons. Her ammunition selection revealed the depth of her tactical thinking. Different bullet weights and compositions for varying distances and target types, specialized rounds for penetrating different materials, tracer rounds for target designation, an inventory that suggested preparation for scenarios far beyond perimeter security. She'd even acquired subsonic ammunition for situations requiring stealth, though her official duties would never require such specialized equipment. The intelligence reports she compiled went far beyond observation logs. Detailed analysis of enemy communication patterns suggested coordination between groups that command assumed were operating independently. Movement schedules indicated preparation for large-scale operations. Supply delivery suggested stockpiling for extended engagement rather than routine operations. These reports landed on Captain Vasquez's desk with reliable regularity, each one professionally formatted and comprehensively documented. Hallie included satellite imagery, tactical assessments, and recommended defensive adjustments. The reports were acknowledged with standard administrative responses, but their recommendations were never implemented, their warnings never elevated to higher command. The disconnect between her intelligence gathering and official recognition had become a source of quiet frustration. Hallie could see threats developing that others missed, could identify solutions that others hadn't considered, but found herself unable to influence decisions that affected base security. Her expertise was treated as enthusiasm, her preparation as overreach. During weapons maintenance sessions, her technical knowledge impressed even senior armorers. She could identify mechanical issues that others missed, suggest improvements that enhanced weapon performance, and execute maintenance procedures with precision that bordered on surgical. Yet when assignments required technical expertise, she watched less qualified personnel receive opportunities that matched her specialized knowledge. Her physical training had adapted to compensate for perceived limitations. While others focused on building mass, Hallie developed functional strength that enhanced her operational effectiveness. Her endurance conditioning allowed her to remain alert during extended surveillance operations. Her flexibility training improved her ability to achieve stable shooting positions in challenging terrain. The language skills she developed studying enemy communications gave her insights into tactical planning that monolingual colleagues couldn't access. She could monitor enemy radio traffic, translate tactical communications, and identify code words that indicated operational preparation. This intelligence provided early warning of enemy activities, but was dismissed as interesting but not actionable. Her technical proficiency extended to equipment that others found intimidating. Advanced optics, range-finding equipment, ballistic computers, all tools that enhance precision shooting but required extensive training to use effectively. Hallie had mastered these systems through independent study, achieving proficiency that exceeded standard requirements. The isolation that resulted from her dedication had become a familiar companion. Fellow soldiers respected her competence but seemed uncomfortable with her intensity. She'd learned to minimize discussion of her preparation, to downplay her analytical insights, to present herself as reliably ordinary rather than exceptionally prepared. As the afternoon sun cast longer shadows across the desert, Hallie continued her methodical surveillance of assigned sectors. Her scope revealed no immediate threats, but her trained eye caught subtle indicators that others would miss. Equipment being moved at unusual hours, personnel rotations that didn't match established patterns, communication activity that suggested coordination rather than routine operations. The picture that emerged from these observations was troubling, but she'd learned that her concerns would be noted rather than acted upon. All she could do is continue her preparation and hope that her unauthorized expertise would never be needed.
The morning briefing 3 weeks later carried an undercurrent of tension that Hallie recognized immediately. Captain Vasquez's expression was tighter than usual, and the intelligence officer's report contained gaps that suggested classified information was being withheld from lower-ranking personnel. Hallie took her customary position in the back row, her notebook ready to document details that others might miss. "We've received reports of increased enemy activity across multiple sectors," announced Major William Cross, the base intelligence commander, whose rare appearances at routine briefings indicated elevated threat levels. "Effective immediately, we're implementing enhanced security protocols. All perimeter positions will maintain heightened alert status, and reconnaissance operations are being expanded." The expanded operations meant additional opportunities for field assignments, and Hallie felt the familiar surge of hope that maybe this time her qualifications would be recognized. The enhanced threat level demanded soldiers with her specific skill set: precision shooting, terrain analysis, and intelligence gathering capabilities that she demonstrated consistently. "Harris," came Captain Vasquez's voice, cutting through her optimism like cold steel, "you'll be reassigned from tower duty to equipment inventory and maintenance. We need someone reliable managing our supply accountability during elevated operations tempo." Supply accountability. While enhanced reconnaissance teams prepared for operations she'd trained for, Hallie would be counting ammunition and tracking equipment serial numbers. The assignment felt like deliberate marginalization, a message that even during increased threat levels, she was considered more valuable as a clerk than as an operative. After the briefing, she approached Major Cross directly, something that violated normal chain of command but seemed justified by the circumstances. "Sir, I've been tracking enemy movement patterns that might be relevant to current operations. I'd like to volunteer for reconnaissance duties where my observations could provide tactical advantage." Major Cross looked at her with the expression of someone encountering an unexpected interruption. "Harris, isn't it? The tower guard with the detailed reports?" His tone suggested familiarity with her intelligence submissions, though not necessarily positive familiarity. "Yes, sir. I believe my terrain analysis and marksmanship qualifications could be valuable for the expanded operations." "I've read your reports, Harris. Very thorough, very detailed. Perhaps too detailed for someone in your position." The words carried implications that made Hallie's stomach tighten. "You seem to spend considerable time analyzing intelligence that falls outside your area of responsibility." "Sir, I study the intelligence because it helps me perform better surveillance from my assigned position." "Does it? Or does it represent someone trying to expand their role beyond what they're qualified for?" Major Cross consulted a folder that Hallie assumed contained her service record. "You've been requesting additional training, volunteering for advanced courses, submitting analysis reports that go far beyond observation logs. That kind of initiative can be problematic." The conversation had shifted into dangerous territory. Her dedication was being reframed as inappropriate ambition, her competence as potential insubordination. "Sir, I'm just trying to be the best soldier I can be." "The best soldier you can be is one who focuses on assigned duties rather than trying to create duties that don't exist. Equipment inventory is critical work during enhanced operations. I suggest you approach it with the attention you've been giving to activities outside your specialty." Walking away from that encounter, Hallie realized that her months of preparation were being used against her. Her detailed intelligence reports were evidence of overreach rather than competence. Her technical expertise was viewed as inappropriate rather than valuable. The institution she dedicated herself to serving was systematically rejecting the service she was qualified to provide. The equipment inventory assignment proved to be more restrictive than she'd expected. Instead of maintaining weapons and optics that would keep her connected to operational activities, she found herself tracking non-tactical supplies, food service equipment, administrative materials, vehicle parts that had nothing to do with combat operations. Sergeant Major Thompson made the restrictions explicit during her first day in the new role. "Harris, Your job is to account for every piece of equipment on these lists. Nothing more, nothing less. I don't want to see reports about tactical considerations or operational recommendations, just accurate counts and proper documentation." The message was clear. Her analytical skills were not welcome, her tactical insights were not desired, and her preparation for combat operations was irrelevant to her value as a soldier. She had been effectively quarantined from any role that might utilize her specialized capabilities. The isolation became more pronounced when she discovered that her replacement on tower duty was Private Johnson, whose marksmanship scores were significantly lower than hers and whose surveillance reports contained a fraction of the details she'd provided. The downgrade in capability suggested that her contributions had been viewed as excessive rather than valuable. During mess hall conversations, I overheard discussions that revealed the broader perception of her situation. Fellow soldiers expressed sympathy mixed with subtle criticism, suggesting that she had brought her own restriction upon herself through overambitious behavior. The narrative being constructed positioned her as someone who had failed to understand her proper role rather than someone whose capabilities were being underutilized. The frustration was compounded by her continued observation of developing threats that others were missing. From her equipment storage assignment, she could still monitor radio traffic and track supply movements that indicated large-scale enemy preparation. But her warnings were now filtered through supervisors who'd been instructed to limit her input to inventory management. As she cataloged medical supplies and vehicle maintenance parts, Hallie wondered if she was witnessing the systematic waste of military resources in the form of underutilized personnel, or if she was indeed the problem that command perceived her to be.
The equipment storage facility became Hallie's unwitting training ground for operations she wasn't authorized to conduct. While cataloging supplies that ranged from medical equipment to specialized communications gear, she discovered resources that could enhance capabilities she wasn't supposed to possess. Her inventory duties provided access to equipment that expanded her tactical options in ways that command hadn't intended. Advanced optics systems designated for sniper operations passed through her cataloging process, and Hallie used the opportunity to familiarize herself with capabilities that exceeded her personal equipment. Night vision scopes, thermal imaging devices, range-finding computers, all tools that she tested and understood through legitimate inventory procedures while secretly expanding her operational expertise. Her access to communications equipment revealed monitoring capabilities that official doctrine restricted to intelligence personnel. Frequency scanners, signal amplifiers, and encryption devices that could intercept enemy communications or coordinate complex operations. Hallie learned to operate these systems during equipment testing procedures, ostensibly to verify functionality, but actually to develop skills that might prove useful. The medical supplies she inventoried included trauma treatment equipment that went far beyond basic first aid. Surgical instruments, advanced medications, emergency life support systems, all items that she studied and practiced with under the guise of ensuring proper storage and maintenance. Her medical knowledge expanded from battlefield first aid to trauma surgery techniques that could save lives in extreme circumstances. Her evening hours were spent converting official duties into unauthorized training. Equipment that required functionality testing provided opportunities to practice with weapon systems beyond her assigned rifle. Communication devices that needed operational verification allowed her to monitor enemy frequencies and develop intelligence that exceeded her official capacity. The base's technical library contained tactical manuals that she accessed through legitimate research requests. Combat medicine, advanced marksmanship, counter-sniper operations, emergency communications, subjects that she studied systematically while officially researching equipment specifications and maintenance procedures. Her knowledge base expanded far beyond what someone in her position was expected to possess. Her personal equipment continued to evolve through careful acquisition and modification. Specialized ammunition that she obtained through legitimate channels but for unauthorized purposes.
custom modifications to her rifle that enhanced precision beyond standard requirements, personal protective equipment that exceeded regulation specifications but improved her operational effectiveness. The training facility provided opportunities for skill development that she approached with systematic determination, physical conditioning that prepared her for operations she wasn't designed to conduct, weapons training that exceeded her official requirements, technical exercises that developed capabilities that had no connection to equipment inventory but might prove essential in crisis situations. Her intelligence gathering had become increasingly sophisticated through access to information sources that her position technically authorized but her supervisors hadn't intended. Satellite imagery databases, weather analysis systems, terrain mapping software, all resources that she studied to develop operational awareness that far exceeded her assigned responsibilities. The supply chain management aspect of her duties provided insights into base operations that revealed vulnerabilities and opportunities that others didn't recognize. Ammunition distribution patterns, fuel consumption rates, equipment maintenance schedules, information that painted a comprehensive picture of base capabilities and limitations. Her analysis of enemy intelligence had progressed from casual observation to systematic investigation. Radio intercepts that she processed during equipment testing, photographic reconnaissance that she analyzed while cataloging imagery equipment, pattern analysis that she conducted while verifying database systems, all activities that appeared legitimate while building intelligence that exceeded official collection efforts. The modifications she made to standard equipment pushed capabilities beyond intended specifications, communication systems that she enhanced to monitor additional frequencies, optical equipment that she calibrated for extended range operations, weapon systems that she optimized for precision that exceeded standard requirements. All improvements that appeared to be routine maintenance while actually preparing for operations she wasn't authorized to conduct. Her tactical planning had evolved into comprehensive preparation for scenarios that official doctrine hadn't considered. Evacuation routes that she'd mapped during equipment deliveries, defensive positions that she'd identified during inventory transfers, supply caches that she'd located during storage management, all preparation for contingencies that exceeded her official responsibilities. The coordination systems she'd developed would allow her to manage operations that required resources and personnel far beyond her authorized control. Communication protocols that she'd established with cooperative personnel, equipment distribution plans that she'd developed through legitimate supply management, operational procedures that she'd designed while officially managing administrative functions. Her weapons proficiency had expanded through practice with systems that passed through her inventory control, crew-served weapons that she'd tested during equipment verification, specialized ammunition that she'd evaluated during storage procedures, tactical equipment that she'd operated during functionality assessments, all experience that prepared her for operations that her position wasn't designed to support. The intelligence network she'd developed provided information sources that exceeded official channels, personnel who trusted her analytical capabilities, equipment operators who shared operational observations, communication technicians who provided access to intelligence that wasn't officially available to someone in her position. As weeks passed, Hallie realized that her forced restriction to support duties had inadvertently provided her with capabilities and knowledge that made her uniquely prepared for complex operations that others couldn't attempt. Her unauthorized preparation had evolved into operational readiness that exceeded what the command structure intended any individual soldier to possess. The irony wasn't lost on her that being excluded from operational assignments had prepared her for operations that would be impossible for soldiers who hadn't been forced to develop such comprehensive, independent capabilities.
The first indication that her activities were being monitored came during a routine equipment inspection when Sergeant Major Thompson arrived with Corporal Davis and an unfamiliar staff sergeant whose presence suggested official investigation rather than administrative review. Hallie continued her inventory work while the inspection team examined equipment logs, storage procedures, and her personal workspace with thoroughness that exceeded standard protocols. "Harris," Thompson called after 30 minutes of silent observation, "step over here for a moment." His tone carried formality that indicated this wasn't a casual conversation. "We've been reviewing your equipment access logs, and some patterns have caught our attention." The equipment access logs documented every item she had handled, tested, or inventoried during her assignment. Standard procedure required detailed tracking, but Hallie realized that her comprehensive testing and evaluation of equipment had created a record that could be interpreted as excessive interest in materials beyond her authorized needs. "You've accessed communications equipment 47 times in the past month," the unfamiliar staff sergeant stated, consulting a folder that contained more documentation than seemed appropriate for routine oversight. "That's significantly higher than previous personnel in your position. Can you explain why communications testing has required such extensive attention?" Hallie chose her words carefully, recognizing that her legitimate duties were being scrutinized for inappropriate motivations. "Sergeant, the communications equipment requires thorough testing to verify functionality before field deployment. I've been ensuring that every system meets operational standards." "And the weapons systems testing?" Corporal Davis interjected, reading from his own documentation. "You've requested access to sniper rifles, specialized optics, and ammunition types that aren't typically handled by supply personnel. Why would inventory duties require familiarity with equipment outside your area of responsibility?" The question highlighted the fundamental problem with her situation. Her competence and curiosity, traits that should have been valued, were being interpreted as evidence of inappropriate ambition or questionable loyalty. Her dedication to understanding the equipment she managed was being reframed as exceeding authorized boundaries. "I need to understand the equipment I'm responsible for maintaining," Hallie replied, maintaining professional composure despite growing unease. "Proper inventory management requires knowledge of operational characteristics, storage requirements, and maintenance specifications." Thompson exchanged glances with his colleagues before continuing. "Harris, we've also noticed that you've been accessing intelligence databases, satellite imagery, and tactical analysis software. These systems fall well outside inventory management requirements. What's your justification for that level of access?" The question struck at the heart of her unauthorized preparation. Her intelligence gathering, while technically within the bounds of her system access privileges, had clearly been noticed and was now being questioned. The line between legitimate research and inappropriate investigation was being drawn in ways that made her activities appear suspicious. "I access those systems to verify equipment locations, track supply movements, and coordinate delivery schedules," she answered, knowing that the explanation sounded thin even as she spoke. Her actual activities had gone far beyond administrative functions, and the interrogation suggested that someone had been monitoring her usage patterns. The staff sergeant she didn't recognize consulted additional documentation before speaking. "According to our records, you've downloaded tactical manuals, studied combat protocols, and researched operations that have no connection to supply management. This suggests interests that extend beyond your assigned duties." The accumulation of evidence painted a picture of someone whose activities exceeded their authorized role, and Hallie realized that her months of preparation were being constructed as a narrative of inappropriate behavior. Her initiative was being interpreted as insubordination, her competence as potential security risk. "Furthermore," Thompson continued, "your personal equipment modifications and specialized training activities have been noted. You've made unauthorized alterations to your assigned rifle, acquired ammunition that exceeds standard allowances, and engaged in training exercises that aren't required for your position." The investigation had clearly been comprehensive, extending beyond her official duties to her personal activities and equipment. Hallie understood that she'd been under surveillance, that her preparation for operations she wasn't assigned to conduct had been documented and was now being used to question her motivations and loyalty. Can you explain why someone in a supply management position would need the level of tactical preparation you've been pursuing? What operational scenarios would justify the skills and equipment you've been developing? The question demanded an answer that would either reveal her unauthorized intentions or demonstrate that she couldn't justify her actions. Hallie recognized the tactical situation she faced. Any explanation that acknowledged her preparation for combat operations would confirm that she'd been exceeding her authorized role, while denying such preparation would contradict the evidence they'd already compiled. I believe in being prepared for whatever situations might arise. Military service requires readiness for unexpected contingencies, and I've tried to develop capabilities that might be useful if circumstances demanded them. Thompson's expression suggested that her answer confirmed his suspicions rather than addressed his concerns. Harris, military effectiveness requires soldiers who focus on their assigned responsibilities rather than creating unauthorized roles for themselves. Your activities suggest someone who's not satisfied with their proper place in the unit structure. The meeting concluded with implicit warnings rather than explicit disciplinary action, but Hallie understood that she was now under official scrutiny. Her preparation had been noticed, documented, and interpreted as evidence of problematic ambition rather than professional dedication. Walking back to her inventory duties, she realized that the very skills she developed to serve her unit more effectively were now being used to justify limiting her opportunities further.
The formal investigation began 2 days after her meeting with the inspection team, though Hallie didn't learn about it until she was summoned to Major Cross's office for what was termed a comprehensive performance review. The folder on his desk was thicker than any standard personnel file, suggesting that her activities had been under scrutiny for longer than she'd realized. "Harris," Major Cross began without preamble, "we've been conducting a thorough review of your activities since your assignment to this base. Some patterns have emerged that require explanation." He opened the folder and began reading from what appeared to be a detailed surveillance report. "You've accessed classified intelligence databases 43 times beyond your authorization level. You've downloaded tactical manuals that have no connection to supply management. You've engaged in training exercises that exceed your assigned role by significant margins. Can you explain why someone in your position would need this level of classified access?" The question struck at the heart of her preparation efforts, revealing that her unauthorized intelligence gathering had been monitored and documented. Hallie chose her words carefully, recognizing that any explanation that acknowledged her tactical preparation would confirm their suspicions about overreach. "Sir, I accessed those systems to better understand the equipment I was managing and the operational environment where that equipment would be deployed. Understanding context helps me perform my assigned duties more effectively." Major Cross consulted additional documentation before responding. "Context for supply management doesn't require studying enemy communication patterns, analyzing satellite imagery of hostile territories, or downloading combat medicine protocols. These activities suggest interests that extend far beyond your assigned responsibilities." The investigation had clearly been comprehensive, extending beyond her official duties to include monitoring of her personal activities, training exercises, and equipment modifications. Someone had been watching her closely enough to document activities that she'd believed were discreet. "Furthermore," he continued, "your personal equipment modifications and specialized ammunition acquisitions have been noted. You've made alterations to your assigned rifle that exceed regulation specifications, acquired ammunition types that aren't standard issue, and engaged in marksmanship training that far exceeds the requirements of perimeter security." The evidence painted a picture of someone whose activities exceeded their authorized role in ways that could be interpreted as preparation for operations they weren't assigned to conduct. Hallie understood that her months of skill development were being reframed as potential security risks. "Sir, I believe in maintaining proficiency with equipment that I might be required to use in emergency situations.
My modifications and training are intended to enhance my effectiveness as a soldier. Effectiveness in what capacity? Major Cross asked pointedly. Because the modifications you've made and the skills you've developed suggest preparation for operations that have nothing to do with supply management or perimeter security. The conversation revealed that her activities had been interpreted through a lens of suspicion rather than recognition. Her dedication was being viewed as potential insubordination, her competence as possible security risk, and her preparation as evidence of inappropriate ambition. Captain Vasquez entered the office carrying additional documentation. Her expression suggested that the investigation had expanded beyond simple performance review. Sir, we've completed the analysis of Harris's communication patterns and equipment usage. The data confirms extensive activities that fall outside her authorized duties. The analysis had apparently included monitoring of her communication activities, equipment access patterns, and training schedules. Hallie realized that she'd been under comprehensive surveillance, with every aspect of her unauthorized preparation documented and analyzed. Harris, Captain Vasquez continued, your access to communication equipment has been far more extensive than required for inventory management. You've been monitoring enemy frequencies, analyzing communication patterns, and developing intelligence assessments that exceed your clearance level and operational role. The surveillance had extended to activities she'd believed were discreet, revealing that her intelligence gathering had been noticed and documented. Her preparation for scenarios that exceeded her assigned duties was being constructed as evidence of problematic behavior. Additionally, your training activities have included scenarios that have no connection to your assigned duties. Combat medicine, advanced marksmanship, tactical movement, all skills that suggest preparation for roles that you're not authorized to perform. Major Cross closed the folder and looked at her with an expression that suggested conclusions had already been reached. Harris, the evidence suggests that you've systematically exceeded your authorized role, accessing classified information beyond your clearance level and preparing for operations that you're not qualified to conduct. The investigation had reframed her months of dedicated preparation as potential security violations, her competence as inappropriate overreach, and her initiative as possible insubordination. Every skill she'd developed to serve more effectively was being used as evidence against her. This kind of behavior raises serious questions about your understanding of military discipline and appropriate role boundaries. Soldiers who exceed their assigned duties without authorization create security risks and operational complications that can endanger their units. The meeting concluded with implicit threats rather than explicit disciplinary action, but Hallie understood that her future opportunities would be even more restricted. Her preparation had been noticed, documented, and interpreted as evidence of problematic ambition rather than professional excellence. Walking back to her inventory duties, she realized that the institution she dedicated herself to serving was systematically punishing her for developing capabilities that might make her more valuable. Her dedication had become suspicious, her competence had become threatening, and her preparation had become evidence of character flaws rather than professional excellence.
The formal restrictions came down 3 days later, in the form of a memorandum that redefined her duties with surgical precision, eliminating any possibility of the activities that had made her effective. Hallie read the document twice, each paragraph representing another door being closed on her military future. Effective immediately, Specialist Harris is restricted to inventory management duties, as specifically outlined in this directive, the memo began. All activities outside these defined parameters require explicit written authorization from commanding officers. The language was bureaucratic, but the intent was unmistakable. She was being placed under something approaching house arrest. The specific restrictions were comprehensive enough to eliminate any possibility of the preparation that had made her effective.
Access to communication equipment is limited to administrative radio checks as required for inventory coordination. No monitoring of tactical frequencies or intelligence communications is authorized. Her ability to gather the intelligence that had proven accurate was being eliminated. Weapons access is restricted to assigned personal equipment only. No testing, evaluation, or familiarization with equipment outside assigned duties is permitted. The restriction meant she couldn't maintain proficiency with weapon systems that might be crucial in emergency situations, couldn't stay current with equipment she might need to use. Training activities are limited to those specifically required for inventory management duties. Participation in tactical exercises, combat medicine training, or marksmanship programs beyond basic qualification is not authorized. They were systematically stripping away every skill that made her valuable, forcing her back into the narrow role that wasted her capabilities. Sergeant Major Thompson delivered the restrictions personally, his expression suggesting that he found the limitations as frustrating as she did. "Harris, this comes from way above my level. Command has decided that your activities have been excessive, and they want you focused exclusively on your assigned duties." The conversation took place in the supply depot, surrounded by equipment that she'd once been allowed to understand and maintain, but was now forbidden to touch beyond basic inventory procedures. The irony wasn't lost on her that she was being restricted from activities that made her better at her job. "What about emergency situations?" Hallie asked, knowing that the question revealed her understanding of the limitations' implications. If there's a crisis that requires skills beyond inventory management. Thompson's expression softened slightly, suggesting that he recognized the waste of resources that the restrictions represented. "Harris, in emergency situations, you follow orders from authorized personnel. Your job is to maintain accurate records and provide equipment support as directed." The restrictions extended beyond professional limitations to social isolation that made her previous exclusion seem mild. Fellow soldiers began treating her with the careful distance reserved for someone under official scrutiny, as if her dedication had become contagious and potentially career-damaging. Her requests for clarification about specific duties were met with responses that emphasized restriction rather than capability. When she asked about testing procedures that might be necessary for proper inventory management, she was told that testing beyond basic functionality checks was not authorized. The medical supplies she'd once been allowed to study and organize were reassigned to personnel who lacked her training but possessed appropriate authorization. Equipment that she understood better than anyone else on the base was placed under the management of soldiers who treated it as administrative items rather than life-saving tools. Her intelligence reports, which had consistently proven accurate, were no longer accepted for processing. The warnings she had been providing about enemy activity patterns were dismissed as outside her area of responsibility, even though those warnings had been correct and official intelligence had missed crucial indicators. The training facility became off-limits except for mandatory physical fitness requirements. Her advanced marksmanship practice was eliminated, her tactical movement training was forbidden, and her combat medicine study was terminated. Skills that she'd developed to serve more effectively were being systematically eliminated. Her personal equipment was inspected, and several modifications were removed as exceeding regulation specifications. The custom trigger mechanism that improved her precision was replaced with standard components. The scope adjustments that compensated for local atmospheric conditions were reset to factory specifications. They were making her less capable in the name of regulatory compliance. The specialized ammunition she'd acquired through legitimate channels was confiscated as inappropriate for her assigned role. Rounds that enhanced precision, penetrated specific materials, or provided tactical advantages were replaced with standard military issue that reduced her effectiveness should emergency situations arise. Her access to technical manuals was restricted to documents specifically related to inventory procedures. The tactical publications that had enhanced her understanding of equipment deployment and operational requirements were removed from her authorized reading list. The communication protocols she had developed for coordinating with operational personnel were terminated. Her radio access was limited to administrative frequencies, eliminating her ability to monitor tactical communications that might provide early warning of developing situations. As the restrictions took effect, Hallie realized that she was being systematically transformed from a soldier into a clerk, from someone who could contribute to mission success into someone whose role was purely administrative. Her competence was being eliminated in the name of regulatory compliance, and her potential was being wasted in the name of appropriate role boundaries. The crushing limitation wasn't just professional, it was existential. They were eliminating the aspects of military service that gave her purpose and value, forcing her back into a role that wasted her talents while ensuring she couldn't develop the capabilities that might make her indispensable.
The morning of September 15th began like any other, with Hallie conducting equipment inventory under the restrictive protocols that had governed her duties for the past 2 weeks. She worked through supply manifests with mechanical precision, checking serial numbers and recording quantities while carefully avoiding any activities that might be interpreted as exceeding her authorized role. The first indication of developing crisis came at 0847 hours when unusual radio traffic began filtering through the base communication systems. Even with her restricted access to tactical frequencies, Hallie could hear the tension in voices discussing patrol schedules and reconnaissance assignments that seemed more extensive than routine operations. From her position in the supply depot, she could observe increased activity across the base that suggested preparation for significant operations. Helicopter maintenance crews were working with unusual intensity. Vehicle operators were conducting pre-deployment inspections, and personnel were drawing equipment at rates that exceeded normal operational tempo. Her restricted access to intelligence systems meant she couldn't analyze the pattern she was observing, but her training allowed her to recognize indicators of major operational preparation. The equipment being drawn included combat medical supplies, extended-duration communication batteries, and ammunition loads that suggested expected engagement rather than routine patrol. Captain Vasquez appeared at the supply depot at 10:34 hours with requisition lists that confirmed Hallie's assessment of developing operations. "Harris, we need rapid processing of equipment requests for expanded reconnaissance operations. Priority processing. No delays." The requisitions revealed the scope of what was being planned: 3 full reconnaissance companies being deployed across grid sectors that Hallie had been studying for months. The areas being targeted matched enemy activity patterns she'd identified in reports that had been dismissed as exceeding her authorized analysis. "Ma'am," Hallie ventured carefully, "the sectors being targeted have shown increased enemy activity patterns that might affect equipment requirements. Enhanced communication gear might be advisable for—" "Harris," Captain Vasquez interrupted sharply, "your job is to process requisitions as submitted, not to provide tactical analysis. Focus on your assigned duties." The dismissal stung, but Hallie continued processing equipment requests while observing activity that increasingly suggested her unauthorized intelligence gathering had been accurate. Enemy patterns she'd been tracking were converging in ways that suggested coordinated activity, but her warnings about those patterns had been ignored. By 1200 hours, the operational preparation had reached levels that indicated immediate deployment. 3 companies, nearly 600 Marines, were being equipped for extended operations in hostile territory that Hallie's analysis had identified as increasingly dangerous. The helicopter activity intensified throughout the afternoon, with multiple aircraft being prepared for transport and close air support missions. The scale of preparation suggested that command expected significant engagement, though the public briefings described the operation as routine reconnaissance and patrol.
Hallie's knowledge of the target areas, gained through unauthorized terrain analysis, told her that the operation was being planned with incomplete intelligence. The sectors being targeted contained enemy positions that official reconnaissance had missed, defensive preparations that could turn routine patrol into large-scale engagement. At 14:30 hours, the formal mission briefing began in the command center, but Hallie's restrictions meant she wasn't authorized to attend despite her knowledge of the operational area. She continued inventory duties while watching personnel prepare for operations that her analysis suggested would encounter more resistance than anticipated. The equipment being loaded onto helicopters included medical supplies that suggested expected casualties, communication gear that indicated anticipation of coordination challenges, and ammunition loads that exceeded standard patrol requirements. Every indicator pointed to command expecting difficult engagement. Her attempts to raise concerns through appropriate channels met with immediate shutdown. When she approached Sergeant Major Thompson with observations about equipment patterns that might indicate inadequate preparation, she was reminded that tactical analysis was outside her authorized duties. The irony was overwhelming. Her months of unauthorized preparation had given her intelligence that could enhance mission success, but her restrictions prevented her from sharing information that might save lives. She possessed knowledge that could improve operational planning, but was forbidden to contribute it. At 15:45 hours, the first phase of Operation Sandstorm began with helicopter departures that carried 600 Marines into territory that Hallie knew contained threats that official intelligence had missed. She watched from her supply depot as aircraft disappeared toward grid sectors where her analysis had identified increasing enemy coordination. The radio traffic that she was authorized to monitor revealed normal operational communications during the initial phases, but her understanding of the terrain and enemy patterns suggested that the situation would deteriorate rapidly once the reconnaissance teams reached their assigned areas. Her equipment inventory duties continued throughout the afternoon, but her attention was focused on communications traffic that increasingly suggested the operation was encountering resistance that exceeded expectations. The patterns she'd been tracking were manifesting exactly as her unauthorized analysis had predicted. By 16:30 hours, radio communications were becoming more frequent and urgent, though the specific content was restricted from her access level. The activity around the command center suggested developing complications, but her limitations prevented her from obtaining information that might confirm her concerns. The crisis that she'd been anticipating through months of unauthorized intelligence gathering was beginning to unfold, but her warnings had been dismissed and her knowledge was being ignored while 600 Marines moved into territory that was more dangerous than official intelligence recognized.
The emergency klaxon shattered the afternoon quiet at 13:47 hours, its urgent wail cutting through the desert heat like a blade. Hallie dropped her equipment checklist and ran toward the command center, her heart hammering as radio chatter exploded across all frequencies. Through the chaos of overlapping voices, she caught fragments that made her blood freeze. Multiple casualties, surrounded, no extraction possible, 600 Marines trapped. The command center buzzed with controlled panic as officers scrambled to coordinate a response to what appeared to be the largest coordinated attack in the base's operational history. On the main display screen, a red zone encompassed grid squares 4-7 through 4-9, exactly the areas where Hallie had been tracking increased enemy activity for weeks. Her unauthorized intelligence gathering had predicted this moment with chilling accuracy. All units, this is command," crackled through the speakers as Major Cross's voice carried across the base communications network. Operation Sandstorm is compromised. Reconnaissance teams Alpha, Bravo, and Charlie are pinned down by superior enemy forces. All support personnel are to withdraw immediately. I repeat, withdraw immediately. Hallie felt the world stop around her. 600 Marines, the entire reconnaissance force, were being abandoned because conventional extraction was deemed impossible.
The teams she'd watched deploy that morning, led by soldiers she'd served alongside for months, were being written off as acceptable losses in the face of overwhelming enemy superiority. "Sir," came Captain Vasquez's voice through the radio, tight with desperation, "we have visual on enemy positions. They've established overlapping fields of fire across all possible helicopter approach routes. Standard extraction protocols are not viable. Request instructions." Major Cross consulted with his staff before responding, his voice heavy with the weight of command decisions that cost lives. "Negative on immediate extraction. Enemy anti-aircraft capabilities make helicopter approach suicidal. Engineering is calculating alternative solutions. All teams are to establish defensive positions and await further orders." Alternative solutions. Hallie understood military euphemism well enough to recognize that meant there were no solutions. The enemy had chosen their position perfectly, creating a killing field that made conventional rescue impossible. Her months of terrain analysis told her that helicopter approach was indeed suicidal, but her knowledge also revealed possibilities that others couldn't see. From her position near the command center entrance, she could see the tactical display showing enemy positions that matched the intelligence she'd been compiling for weeks. Machine gun nests positioned to cover helicopter landing zones, mortar teams positioned to coordinate fire on evacuation routes, sniper positions that commanded every approach the rescue teams would attempt. But Hallie also saw what the tactical display couldn't show: alternative routes that her unauthorized reconnaissance had revealed, elevated positions that could provide overwatch for extraction operations, and weak points in the enemy formation that precision fire could exploit. Her months of studying terrain that she wasn't supposed to analyze had given her knowledge that could save 600 lives. "Major Cross," she said, stepping forward despite knowing that interrupting command operations could end her military career, "I've studied that terrain extensively. There are options that aren't being considered." The command center fell silent except for the static of radio communications. Officers turned toward her with expressions ranging from surprise to irritation. Major Cross looked at her with the same expression he'd worn during their previous conversation about overreach and inappropriate ambition. "Harris, this is not the time for speculation from support personnel. Return to your duties." "Sir, I can provide precision overwatch from elevated positions that would allow helicopter extraction. The enemy positions have blind spots that could be exploited if someone could reach the high ground and provide coordinated fire support." "Are you suggesting that you could single-handedly neutralize enemy positions that are pinning down our most experienced combat personnel?" The question came from Colonel Martinez, whose presence indicated that command authority extended well beyond base level. Hallie looked at the tactical display, at the blinking dots representing soldiers whose lives hung in the balance while command debated conventional solutions to an unconventional problem. "Sir, I'm suggesting that precision fire from elevated positions could suppress enemy overwatch and create windows for helicopter extraction. My analysis of the terrain shows approach routes that aren't currently being considered." "Your analysis?" Major Cross's voice carried implications that made the air in the command center feel electric. "What analysis would that be, Harris? Because as far as I know, terrain analysis isn't part of inventory management." The moment had arrived where her months of unauthorized preparation would either justify themselves or end her career. 600 Marines were facing annihilation while she stood in a command center being questioned about exceeding her assigned role. "Sir, I've been studying the operational area because I believed my skills could be useful if circumstances required them. Those circumstances have arrived. I can reach positions that will provide tactical advantage for extraction operations, and I have the marksmanship skills necessary to make the mission successful." Colonel Martinez stepped forward, his expression unreadable. "Harris, you're describing a suicide mission. Even if you could somehow reach elevated positions, you'd be facing enemy forces that have pinned down our most experienced combat personnel." "With respect, sir, Our most experienced combat personnel are trained for conventional operations. This situation requires unconventional solutions." I paused, knowing that her next words would either open a door or close it permanently. "I've prepared for exactly this scenario. I have the skills, the equipment, and the tactical knowledge necessary to create extraction opportunities that conventional approaches can't achieve." The silence stretched until a radio crackled with another desperate transmission from the trapped reconnaissance teams. Time was running out, and conventional solutions were proving inadequate to meet an unconventional threat. Major Cross looked at Hallie with an expression that seemed to weigh her worth against the lives of 600 Marines. "Harris, if you're wrong about this, a lot of people die. If you're right but fail in execution, even more people die. Are you prepared to accept responsibility for those consequences?" Hallie looked at the tactical display one more time, at the positions that she'd studied and the routes that she'd memorized. "Sir, I'm prepared to accept responsibility for trying to save lives when conventional methods have failed. I cannot accept responsibility for watching 600 Marines die when I might be able to prevent it."
The equipment room became a war zone of controlled chaos as Hallie assembled gear for an operation that officially didn't exist. Major Cross had given her 10 minutes to prove her preparation wasn't just theoretical knowledge, and every second counted as radio reports from the trapped reconnaissance teams grew increasingly desperate. She moved through the storage area with mechanical precision, selecting equipment that most soldiers wouldn't know how to operate, but that she'd trained with during months of unauthorized preparation. Her primary weapon was the modified sniper rifle she'd perfected through countless hours of adjustment and testing. Custom trigger mechanism calibrated to her grip, scope zeroed for atmospheric conditions specific to their operational area, bipod adjusted for her compact frame, every component optimized for precision that exceeded standard military specifications. She loaded specialized ammunition that she'd acquired through legitimate channels, but for purposes that command had never authorized. The communications package she assembled would allow her to coordinate with extraction helicopters, monitor enemy radio traffic, and maintain contact with base command throughout the operation. Frequency scanners, encryption devices, and signal amplifiers that she'd learned to operate during equipment testing procedures now served their intended tactical purpose. Her medical kit contained trauma supplies that went beyond basic battlefield first aid, surgical instruments, advanced medications, emergency blood products that could sustain casualties during extended evacuation procedures. The supplies reflected her understanding that the mission might require treating injuries that exceeded conventional medical training. Navigation equipment that she'd modified for extended range operations included GPS systems, terrain mapping software, and range-finding computers that would allow her to coordinate fire support from positions that others couldn't reach. Her months of studying satellite imagery had revealed approach routes that bypassed enemy observation, but reaching those positions would require technical climbing skills that few soldiers possessed. The helicopter flight to her insertion point took 12 minutes through hostile airspace that tested every defensive system the aircraft possessed. Hallie monitored enemy communications through her scanner, translating tactical discussions that revealed coordination between groups that command had assumed were operating independently. Her intelligence gathering had been accurate. This was the largest coordinated attack the enemy had attempted. "Overwatch, this is transport," came the pilot's voice through her headset. "Insertion point is 2 clicks from target zone. Enemy activity is heavy throughout the area. You sure about this approach route?" Hallie consulted her modified GPS system, correlating satellite imagery with real-time observations. "Confirmed transport. The approach route avoids established enemy positions. Drop me at coordinates 347-891 and maintain radio silence until extraction coordination begins." The insertion was everything her training had prepared her for, and nothing like training had suggested. Real hostile fire created psychological pressure that simulation couldn't replicate, but her preparation had been thorough enough to maintain operational effectiveness despite stress that would have overwhelmed someone without her specialized background.
Her movement through enemy territory required every skill she developed through unauthorized training, technical climbing to reach elevated positions that provided tactical advantage, stealth movement through terrain that offered minimal concealment, and navigation that relied on landmarks she'd memorized rather than equipment that might compromise her position. The first enemy position she encountered matched her intelligence analysis perfectly. Machine gun nest positioned to cover helicopter approach routes, but vulnerable to precision fire from elevated angles that conventional assault couldn't achieve. Her modified rifle allowed engagement at ranges that exceeded enemy expectations, and her specialized ammunition penetrated defensive positions that would have stopped standard military rounds. Her communications with extraction helicopters required coordination skills that extended beyond individual marksmanship to tactical management of complex operations. Eagle Flight, this is Overwatch. Enemy position Alpha is neutralized. You have a 60-second window for approach to landing zone Bravo. Be advised, mortar team at coordinates 348-903 has range on your approach route. The precision required for effective Overwatch exceeded anything she'd practiced during training. Real combat conditions included variables that simulation couldn't replicate, wind patterns affected by terrain features, atmospheric conditions that changed bullet trajectory, and time pressure that demanded instant decision-making based on incomplete information. Her engagement of multiple enemy positions required ammunition management that balanced immediate tactical needs against extended operation requirements. Each shot had to count, both for tactical effectiveness and resource conservation, while maintaining rate of fire that suppressed enemy movement without revealing her position to counter-snipers. The medical treatment she provided to wounded Marines during helicopter extractions tested every skill she'd developed through unauthorized study of trauma procedures. Combat injuries that required immediate surgical intervention, blood loss that demanded advanced life support, and evacuation procedures that required medical decision-making under fire. Her coordination of multiple helicopter extractions required tactical awareness that encompassed friendly and enemy positions across an operational area that spanned several square kilometers. Radio traffic management, timing coordination, and threat assessment that allowed extraction of personnel who would otherwise have been written off as acceptable losses. As the final extraction helicopter departed with the last group of rescued Marines, Hallie maintained Overwatch position until all friendly forces were clear of the engagement zone. Her ammunition was nearly exhausted, her communications equipment was running on backup power, and her medical supplies had been used to treat 19 wounded personnel during the evacuation. The mission that command had deemed impossible was complete. 600 Marines who had been abandoned as unsavable were safely extracted through operations that exceeded conventional military doctrine.
The debriefing room at FOB Meridian had been transformed into something resembling a military tribunal, but the atmosphere carried celebration rather than condemnation. Hallie sat at a table that faced a panel of officers whose expressions ranged from amazement to professional embarrassment. Colonel Martinez, Major Cross, and Captain Vasquez were joined by several senior officers whose presence indicated that her unauthorized operation had attracted attention from command levels well beyond base operations. "Specialist Harris," began Colonel Martinez, consulting a folder thick with operational reports and tactical analyses. "Your actions yesterday resulted in the successful extraction of 600 Marines who had been designated as unrecoverable casualties. However, those same actions violated direct orders, exceeded your authorized operational scope, and utilized equipment and training that you weren't supposed to possess." Hallie maintained military bearing despite exhaustion that made concentration difficult. "Yes, sir. I understood the risks and consequences when I made the decision to intervene. The question we're here to address," continued Major Cross, "is whether you're a disciplinary problem who got lucky, or whether this command has been criminally underutilizing a soldier whose capabilities far exceed her assigned role." The investigation that had followed her operation revealed the extent of her unauthorized preparation in ways that impressed rather than concerned the officers reviewing her actions. Her intelligence gathering had been more comprehensive than official reconnaissance efforts. Her tactical analysis had been more accurate than command-level assessments. Her equipment modifications had created capabilities that exceeded standard military specifications. "Harris," said Captain Vasquez, "the after-action reports from the rescued personnel describe marksmanship that they characterized as supernatural, precision shooting at ranges that shouldn't have been possible, target acquisition under conditions that would challenge our most experienced snipers, and tactical coordination that managed complex operations across multiple zones simultaneously." The reports had indeed been extraordinary. Marines who'd served in combat for years described shooting that exceeded anything they'd witnessed, enemy positions neutralized at ranges that pushed the limits of equipment capabilities, tactical coordination that managed helicopter extractions under fire while simultaneously providing medical treatment to wounded personnel. Lieutenant Colonel Hayes, whose presence indicated investigation from higher command levels, leaned forward with documentation that suggested comprehensive review of her military record. "Specialist Harris, your service file indicates that you've been requesting advanced training, volunteering for specialized courses, and developing skills that far exceeded your assigned duties for your entire military career. Why wasn't this potential recognized and developed through official channels?" The question highlighted institutional failures that went beyond individual oversight to systematic problems with personnel utilization. Hallie had been presenting evidence of exceptional capability for months, but that evidence had been interpreted as overambition rather than underutilization. "Sir, I believe my requests for expanded responsibilities were viewed as inappropriate for someone in my position. My preparation for advanced operations was seen as exceeding my assigned role rather than demonstrating readiness for expanded responsibilities." "Indeed," Colonel Martinez said, exchanging glances with his colleagues, "which raises serious questions about how we evaluate potential and assign personnel to roles that match their capabilities rather than our preconceptions about what those capabilities should be." The conversation that followed revealed that Hallie's situation wasn't unique. The investigation had uncovered other personnel whose capabilities exceeded their assignments, soldiers whose potential was being systematically wasted through institutional bias and bureaucratic limitation. "Harris," said Major Cross, "effective immediately, you're being reassigned to Special Operations Command. Your unauthorized operation yesterday demonstrated skills that should have been recognized and developed years ago. SOC has requested your immediate transfer for advanced training that will prepare you for operations that require exactly the kind of independent initiative you displayed." Special Operations Command. The words hit Hallie like a physical blow, representing opportunities she'd dreamed about but never expected to receive. Recognition not just of her actions but of her potential for operations that matched her capabilities. "Furthermore," Colonel Martinez continued, "your tactical analysis and intelligence gathering methods are being incorporated into official doctrine. Your approach to terrain analysis, enemy pattern recognition, and operational planning have proven more effective than our standard procedures." The institutional changes extended beyond her individual reassignment to systematic reforms in how potential was identified and developed. Her unauthorized preparation was being studied as a model for the kind of initiative that should be encouraged rather than discouraged. 6 months later, Hallie stood in a briefing room that buzzed with pre-mission energy as her team prepared for operations that pushed the boundaries of what conventional military doctrine considered possible. The Special Operations patch on her shoulder carried weight that her inventory management insignia never had. And when she spoke about tactical considerations, senior officers took notes rather than dismissing her input. "The terrain analysis indicates 3 possible approach routes," she told her team, pointing to satellite imagery displayed on the main screen. "Enemy positions are concentrated here and here, which creates opportunities for overwatch positions that can support extraction operations." Her team leader, Captain Williams, nodded approvingly. "What's your assessment of the precision requirements, Harris?" "Challenging but manageable," Hallie replied, unconsciously echoing words she'd spoken in a different briefing room when no one was willing to listen. "Weather conditions are favorable, and target acquisition should be optimal given the elevation advantage." As her team prepared for deployment, Hallie reflected on the journey that had brought her from overlooked inventory specialist to Special Operations Marksman. The skills that had once been viewed as inappropriate ambition were now recognized as exceptional preparation. The dedication that had been questioned as overreach was now valued as professional excellence.
The mission alarm sounded, indicating deployment time. As her team moved toward their helicopter, Hallie smiled at the irony that her unauthorized operation had become a textbook example of the kind of initiative that military leadership claimed to value but had consistently discouraged. The helicopter lifted off into clear afternoon skies, carrying her team toward another operation that conventional wisdom would deem impossible. As they flew over terrain that she had once studied without authorization, Hallie keyed her radio with the confidence of someone whose capabilities were finally matched to responsibilities that utilized them. Command, this is Overwatch Leader Harris. Team is en route to target. Estimated time to operational readiness, 30 minutes. Copy that, Overwatch Leader. Weather conditions are optimal. Execute mission as planned. Hallie settled back in her seat and watched the landscape roll past below. Somewhere in that terrain, personnel were waiting for extraction that others had deemed impossible. She was looking forward to proving them wrong again, because that's what happened when preparation met opportunity and institutional limitations were replaced by recognition of actual capability. The mission was just beginning, but she already knew how it would end, as everyone coming home safely, because that's what happened when the right person with the right skills was finally given the right opportunity to make all the difference.